Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome once again to Compass Points, the podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, events, personalities, politics, government, and anything else that catches our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder, co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com, and I am joined, as always, by Scott Barker, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com. Scott, how are you doing?
Doing great, Jesse. Looking forward to the holiday coming up, and so things are good.
Well, good. Yes, next weekend, big holiday weekend, Labor Day, the official end of summer, although obviously for anybody who's returned to school in one capacity or another, summer ended a while ago. We are going to take a little break ourselves next week from this podcast. We think that it's a good time for us to recharge a little bit and maybe give all of our listeners a little break from being inundated from so much talk about Knoxville and Knox County government.
Yeah, it's it's Labor Day. It's the day to rest from your labors.
That's
and
right.
So we're gonna do that too.
So we will be back the following week with all sorts of news, no doubt. But in the meantime, we hope everybody enjoys that Labor Day weekend. We do have a podcast for you this week, however, and we have a lot to talk about because this was a pretty busy week. We had some long public meetings talking about some interesting and significant issues. Coming up in a little bit, we're going to have an interview with Andrew Davis, who is the policy advisor to County Mayor Glenn Jacobs, and we will be talking with him about one of the issues that we're going to talk about from this past week. We also are going to talk through some interesting changes in laws and regulations around right-of-way acquisition, which is another one of these things that sounds a little esoteric and maybe a little bit boring, but actually turns out to matter and could have interesting consequences. We will be talking a little bit about abortion. It's not exactly a local issue, but it is a state-level issue, and the new state law that went into effect this week, of course, is in effect in Knoxville and Knox County, as well as the rest of Tennessee. And then we had these couple of long public meetings. We will talk about a vote and prolonged debate at City Council about the future of the new downtown stadium. Mm-hmm. And to kick us off, we're going to talk about the other long public meeting of the week, which was County Commission on Monday night. We have been talking on this podcast for a couple of months now about this, what was a proposed change and is now an approved change, because County Commission passed this on a 6-4 vote, to the appeals process for certain kinds of decisions made by the Knox County Planning Commission. We have gone into this in a lot of detail in previous podcasts, so I'm not going to rehash the whole issue. But for those who haven't been following breathlessly changes in the county planning process, basically, the biggest impact here is when somebody wants to build a new subdivision in Knox County, and this is the areas of Knox County outside the city. Mm-hmm. City of Knoxville has all of its own development rules and planning zoning codes. But outside the city, where we still have a lot of agricultural land, much of that is subject to development, often into residential subdivisions. the most common process that developers use to build those subdivisions is submitting, it's a planned residential zone is the name of the zone. And to qualify under that, they have to submit development plans, kind of showing what they're going to do, where everything's going to be. Those go to Planning Commission for approval. Up until now, if a local neighborhood or resident was concerned about the impact of that new development on them, they could appeal those Planning Commission decisions to the county's Board of Zoning Appeals. And then, after that board weighed in, there was a further appeal possible to Chancery Court. Now, under this new ordinance that was just approved, people can still attempt to appeal to the Board of Zoning Appeals, but developers, the people proposing the development, will have the option of opting out of that BZA hearing and instead forcing that appeal straight to Chancery Court without going through the County Board of Zoning Appeals. This was really heavily, stiffly opposed by a coalition of community and neighborhood groups, residents associations, homeowners associations, all across Knox County, kind of led by, under the umbrella of the Knox County Planning Alliance. But a whole bunch of representatives of those neighborhood groups came to County Commission at Monday's meeting and very forcefully argued against taking away this ability to appeal these decisions to the BZA. They say that this is going to basically make it harder for people to have input into shaping the future of their communities, having some say in how the areas right next to or close to them get developed, and that going to court is a more expensive and more onerous process. And they suspect that the real purpose behind this is to just discourage people from objecting to developments at all. County Mayor Glenn Jacobs really lobbied hard for this, and that's a little bit of what we're going to be talking to Andrew Davis about in the upcoming interview. But the net result of all of it, after several hours of discussion, both from the public and then among commissioners themselves, was a 6-4 vote in favor of this proposal. So that ordinance will now take effect. So, Scott, you've covered this, as I have too, because it came through Planning Commission first, and then you also covered the previous County Commission hearing on this. Were you surprised by this vote?
I wasn't surprised by the vote. Just by covering them before, you kind of saw how the battle lines were drawn. I wasn't surprised by the vote. I think that one thing that Jacobs and his team did was they got out some developers to talk about, how it actually affected them. Prior to that, it had all been the neighborhood groups saying what a horrible thing it was, and Jacobs just saying, "Hey, old developers don't like it," but the developers themselves didn't talk. And that happened. That was that added a dimension to it. I think that was worthy.
And not just the developers, but also representatives from the Knoxville Association of Realtors were there, and the Knoxville Chamber, both of them arguing that sort of anything that makes it a little bit easier to develop housing in particular, they are in favor of, because they think Knox County just needs more housing, period.
Yeah, but the other thing that has struck me throughout this entire process is how seldom this actually happens. It's not like every other subdivision that's proposed for the county outside the Knoxville city limits is appealed. It goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals and winds up with some kind of. It just doesn't happen very often.
Right. I think the numbers were only 16 times in the last 15 years. The mayor's office said, well, yes, but it's been happening more recently. Even at that, it's only like 3 projects out of the last 18 months. That's a little less than 3% of the total projects like this that came through. So, it doesn't happen much. And the mayor's office, and we'll hear this from Andrew Davis when we talk to him, say that their big concern was kind of heading it off before it becomes a problem.
I want to nip it in the bud.
Right.
And and they have. I mean, they were successful, and now if neighborhood groups or individuals want to appeal, they have to probably be prepared to go straight to Chancery Court.
Mm-hmm. And hire a lawyer.
And hire a lawyer and go
that.
through that expense. And that
Right.
was the big complaint that the neighborhood groups had was, BZA, it's not onerously expensive to appeal to them, and it gets the job done. And now they, in all likelihood, will have to go to court.
And we'll just have to see how often that actually happens, what kinds of actual impacts this has. I think the politics of this were interesting because, of course, Jacobs was just reelected to a second term. I feel like a mayor is never more powerful than right after they've been reelected because they've served a term. People have found them, acceptable enough to continue to be rewarded with a second term. So you have that affirmation, and there's a certain point in that second term when you're term limited, as Jacobs is, where the kind of lame duck syndrome starts kicking in, and people. But we're still a long way from that. Jacobs is going to be mayor for the next 4 years, so anybody who wants to do anything at the county kind of has to take him into account, including county commissioners. And of course, we have a strongly Republican majority on county commission, who you would think would generally want to support the Republican mayor's priorities. And that 6-4 vote, all 6 of the people who voted for it were Republican commissioners. Both Democrats, because there's only two out of 11 county commissioners are Democrats, they both voted against it, as did 2 of the Republican commissioners, John Schoonmaker and Terry Hill, who represent areas in West Knox County from Concord and Farragut up through Hardin Valley and Carnes that have really borne the brunt of the massive growth that we've seen. Those are the areas that have seen massive growth in the county, and I think that their constituents are the ones who are feeling most burdened by the growth that has happened. So it's maybe not surprising that they're the commissioners who were in favor of leaving a little more voice with the people, quote unquote.
Especially Schoonmaker, because Schoonmaker came up into politics through neighborhood organizations. That was his. That was his entree. His entrance into politics was through neighborhood organizations and fighting things like this and annexation, back when annexation was a thing. And all that. So
he also served on the Board of Zoning Appeals
himself.
That's true. So he brought that
yeah.
experience and said, "Look, when I was on the BZA, this barely ever happened, and it wasn't a big issue, and I don't see why we have to change it."
Yeah.
But it was a political win for Jacobs, certainly, and as we said, we'll be talking a little bit more with Andrew Davis about that. So let's move on from that very long meeting to what happened Tuesday night at City Council. And I just want to set this up by noting that these changes to the stadium agreement that we're going to be talking about here in a minute, they also had to be approved by County Commission. County Commission approved them without any discussion at all on Monday. It was on their consent agenda, and it just went straight through, totally fine.
Yes.
Democrats, Republicans, everybody in favor, no fuss, no nothing. Same agreements the next night go to City Council, and what happened?
Oh, it was a slugfest. It was the debate lasted roughly 3 hours. Got real testy, especially toward the end. There was a lot of discussion that quite frankly, was basically trying to set back the clock and start over again and debate whether the stadium should be built at all, which has been decided for almost a year. So it's not the decision whether to build the stadium is done. What they were actually considering was a change in how to pay for it. We've talked about this before. Construction prices have gone out, and they've blown out the estimate. The estimate was about $80 million. It's going to be more than that. And the city and the county aren't going to pay. They're not going to borrow more through a bond issue than the $65 million they've already pledged. So that is off the table. And so they have been looking for a way to cover this added expense, and they don't know what that is yet. And get into that in a second. But what the solution they came up with is to have arrange for a loan from Tennessee Smokies owner Randy Boyd,
Also University of Tennessee president.
yes, and a loan from him for up to $20 million to cover any what the actual price ends up being. They don't know what it is yet because they're having to finalize the construction documents, the drawings, and get everything down to the nail, essentially, of what they're going to be needing, and then they can come up with a budget. And based on what the prices are going to be, that's going to happen in November or so. And until then, we don't know. It might, they don't anticipate it will be the full 20 million. It could be 15 million, could be 12 million. I think it's going to be above 10, but they won't know. And once they do set on that, then they'll have a budget with a guaranteed maximum price. That's important because one of the big areas of discussion during this 3 hours of stadium talk was Randy Boyd's pledge to cover cost overruns out of pocket.
Which is something he said last year.
He said it last
during
year.
The discussions about the stadium.
He said it last year during the debate over whether to build the stadium. I think it carried a lot of weight. But then now with this, it's kind of like, what is the definition of a cost overrun? And they talked about that quite often during the meeting. And basically, you can't have a cost overrun until you have a budget.
And they've never had a budget. They've just had an estimate.
Right. So once they set the budget, he'll be responsible for any cost overruns out of pocket there. But to get to a budget, they're going to have this loan, and to pay for the loan, to pay back the loan, the city and the county had to vote on it too. Expanded a tax increment financing district. We talked about that before, where the new revenues from new development,
The property taxes
from new development will be basically go to KCDC, put in a fund, and they'll pay back Boyd. Another thing of note there, that money also will be paying back the city for about $14 million of infrastructure improvements associated with the stadium.
Right, which was, they had already established the TIF district just for that.
Just for that, and then they expanded it to account for the loan. But the city gets its money first. So, and that's going to be about $700,000 a year. They estimate they will need to cover the way that they're spreading out the cost. And so the first $700,000 out of this TIF fund will go to the city. If there's anything left over, Randy Boyd gets it as payback for the loan. It's going to mean the loan's going to be structured really funny. It's going to be a real unique thing because Randy Boyd has no guarantee, and they also mentioned this, he has no guarantee of when he's going to get this money paid back to him. It may be a few years before the first payment can be made.
And how long is the TIF district in effect for?
I believe the TIF district's in for 30 years. Like
Basically, the length of the loan on the stadium.
And
well, and I think it's worth noting that this is a very unusual financing arrangement. We've never seen anything like this, where you have a public project, which the stadium is, and then a private loan to make up a financing gap on a public project that is then supposed to be paid back with essentially public funds, because these are future property tax revenues. This is a weird beast.
Yes, it is. It's an unusual arrangement. It's one of those things that it takes a long time for them to figure it out too. You've got the Sports Authority's bond counsels, Mark Mamontoff. He has been involved in virtually every publicly funded stadium project in the state of Tennessee. I mean, he is for the last 3 decades. So he's as well versed on funding stadium projects as they come, and it's taking him a long time to work through all these details, in a way, and in the The Sports Authority is basically representing the taxpayers, and they're under an obligation to protect the taxpayers. I think that's one reason that they're arranging the loan payback the way they are, where Boyd takes all the risk because he doesn't know how much and when he's going to get money back to cover the actual amount of the loan, which again could be a maximum of $20 million, but probably won't be that much.
Right. Although I would think that there will be an incentive for that budget. So the amount of that loan is going to be contingent on the size of the total budget, right?
Right.
And then Boyd has pledged to cover overruns on top of what the total budget is.
Right.
It's hard not to think that there will be incentive for Randy Boyd to set that total budget number, including the loan, as high as possible, because he's going to be personally responsible for anything above that.
Yeah, there is probably that incentive. I think that that's why the oversight from the Sports Authority would be important. I don't think that they would take too kindly to any kind of inflated budget figures there, and they do have some expertise. One of the members of the Planning Commission, or not the Planning Commission, excuse me, the Sports Authority is a banker who's had lots of experience with stadiums in Baltimore, Maryland. I mean, they understand. They've got people on there who understand how stadium financing works, and they can and how development works, and how so the onus is on the Sports Authority to make sure that the budget that is ultimately approved is reasonable and has a basis in reality.
Well, and so I think this issue of whether or not Boyd committed to cover cost overruns, or what was exactly meant by cost overruns, you can certainly understand the argument that, well, we've never had a budget, therefore that $80 million number that we've all been using is just an estimate, and his commitment was never specifically, I'll pay anything more than $80 million, and none of this is in writing. There's no approved agreement committing him to that. It's just what he said. On the other hand, I understand why people who sat through all of those meetings, including city council members, heard and thought that they understood that he meant he would pay for anything over $80 million.
Right.
And, there was some talk about, well, goalposts are moving here. And I think that's a fair concern. The goalposts have moved because it's going to cost more.
Yeah.
So it's a literal moving of the goalposts.
Well, that is a I do think a lot of people heard anything above 80 million. One, during the public forum portion of it, Gary Lowe, who's the head of the Tennessee Conservative Union, went to the podium and he got out his phone and played a recording from city council meeting last November, I believe it was, when Boyd, one of the times that Boyd made that pledge to pay for cost overruns, and he played it for everybody at the meeting, and then. And that was brought up. Councilwoman Amelia Parker and Seema Singh both brought that up. Parker over and over again, continually brought it up, and they both ended up voting against the funding plan. Another council member, Charles Thomas, who had previously supported the stadium, also voted against it, and he kind of spoke to that a little bit. He said, you might want to call it an estimate, you might want to call it a budget, whatever. It's still more money. I'm not comfortable with this financing plan. I was comfortable with the initial one. I'm not comfortable with this one. I'm voting against it. So the debate went on and on and on. The 3 hours, eventually, like I said, it did pass. There were 3 no votes, so it passed on a 6-3 vote. It got really testy at the end. I think part of it was everybody was tired. They didn't take a break. I think a couple of people probably needed to take a break and go to the restroom and all. But one of the key features was that during the course of the meeting, Councilwoman Amelia Parker took the floor for extended periods of time. At one point, I think there was one time that she was speaking that took close to 30 minutes. I didn't time it exactly, but I remember after a while I looked back up at the clock and close to 30 minutes had passed. And a lot of it was going back over things that had been discussed before. She said she had 30 pages of questions that needed to be answered. And Councilman Lauren Ryder got frustrated. And one of the things that council members do, the little background on what goes on, is a lot of times they will ask administration questions about before the meeting, which is not a violation of Sunshine Law. It's all okay. But they'll ask Stephanie Welch in this case. She's the city's point person on the stadium project. Get clarification from her on things. Ask questions about how this is going to work and that's going to work. That informs their questions. They know which questions to ask at the meeting. It makes things go faster. Even a lot of times they'll know the answer to the question, but they'll want the administration to say it out loud for the public's benefit, and they know what questions to ask. And it didn't seem like Parker had done that because she was going over a lot of things.
Now, she said she did reach out to Stephanie Welch, but I guess they didn't actually have a conversation.
We'll get to that in a minute, because that was what Lauren Ryder was angry about. And at one point, and she said, asked Parker if she reached out to Welch, and she said, yes, she reached out to her, and we'll get to this in a minute, but she said she reached out to her and said that they only had 6 days to prepare, and she had too many questions that could be answered. I don't know. One of the weird things about that was if they couldn't be answered in 6 days by Stephanie Welch, how could they be answered in a couple hours in one public meeting? I don't know, but anyway, that angered Ryder, and so then she polled every other council member by name, one by one, asking them if they had done their homework and talked to Stephanie Welch before the meeting, and every one of them had. That did her tactic did kind of draw the ire of Councilwoman Singh, who kind of called her out on it. But that was
right. She was sort of accusing Parker of not doing her homework.
Right. Yes, or at least not doing it in an efficient way.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody. Everybody knows that she does do a lot of reading of material. But one of the things that subsequently found out, she did email Ryder and ask her for a document. But
you mean Welch?
I'm sorry, Welch.
She can't email Ryder. That would be a
violation.
Public meeting.
But apparently there was no actual phone conversation.
Right.
And so, which is typically how council members, prepare for meetings and all. And so that's kind of been a long simmering thing too. It's not just.
Right. Well, we talked about just a month ago on a different issue. Parker ended up basically insulting all of her colleagues in an email that became public.
Yeah.
And so that there's some tensions there.
There are definitely tensions there, and in fact, after the meeting, sources have told me that Ryder was one of Parker's supporters, not Parker herself. Make clear that, but as one of her supporters actually confronted Ryder in a very aggressive and angry way after the meeting, and it was a very tense situation apparently. So things are heating up, and with the interpersonal relationships, which can affect how things go moving forward. The upshot of all this is stadium project still going forward. They have a new funding plan in place. And we still don't know what the actual budget's going to be, what the actual cost is going to be, and we won't know probably until November.
Well, and I think that there's some, we talked about the political dimensions of the BZA fight. I think the politics of this are interesting because we have city elections coming up next year. Obviously, mayor can candidate. I should say, I don't think anybody yet has officially announced they're running for re-election, so we don't know for sure
Right, yeah.
who all is going to seek re-election next year, but Mayor Cannon would be up for re-election. Charlie Thomas and Amelia Parker would both be up for re-election, two who voted against it. And then the two of the 6 members who voted for it, Lynn Fugit and Janet Testerman, would also be up for re-election next year. And I think that'll be an interesting test of to what degree this is really a significant issue to sort of the voting population at large. Because if you have 4 council members running for re-election, 2 of whom have just voted to support the financing for the stadium and 2 of whom voted against it, if this is a really divisive issue in the community, which we don't really know, really know, nobody really knows what the whole population of Knoxville thinks about this. It'll just be interesting to see how that plays out, including maybe they all get reelected. The ones who supported it, the ones who voted against it. I mean, it's hard to say.
Yeah, it is. And the one interesting thing about all this is while this is a joint city and county project, the city is paying less than half. Of course, the county's paying less than half as well, because there's a big two things: a big state grant that's going into this, and as well, and Randy Boyd is paying some costs out of pocket. In fact, they're already working on the site now. He's paying that out of pocket in anticipation that this is all going to go through. So the interesting thing is while it is a joint project, it's viewed, I think, by most people as a city project.
Yeah.
And
it's happening in the city.
It's happening in the city. The city, while the county's going to benefit, well, or should benefit well if everything goes according to plan, but it's viewed as a city project that's going to benefit the city more than the county. The surrounding development, the sales taxes that aren't dedicated to the stadium, the sales taxes that go elsewhere. So all that, but there's no opposition at all in the county, at least from the elected officials in the county, none whatsoever.
Yep.
It's all, most of the objections are coming from people in the city. The council members we talked about, there's a lot of online chatter. A lot of people who post online are, that I've seen, most of them are against the stadium for one reason or another. But I think that's pretty common in social media things, because if it's something that you
right, you
support,
you tend to see more opposition to pretty much anything online. Than you see
so,
support.
as far as now, the Associated Realtors did a survey a while back, not since this change in the finance plan went on, where at a majority of people did support the stadium. So it's I think that most of the officials, the council members and commissioners who voted for it, can be pretty confident that the majority of people out there have at least expressed a support. But things can change as the prices can change and public sentiment can change.
Yeah, I think it is worth noting that we have not heard from either county commissioners or city council members that this is something that they are themselves receiving a tremendous amount of negative feedback from, which we do usually hear that from them when it's an issue like the BZA issue, for example, where I know county commissioners heard a large volume of negative commentary about that. The stadium does not seem to be, certainly you can look on any Facebook thread and there's plenty of skepticism of it, but we have not heard from our public officials that this is something that that they're getting a massive amount of negative feedback from.
They got council members got a lot more negative feedback about another issue that they were going to consider on Tuesday night, but postponed, and that was the sculpture that's going in at Cradle of Country Music Park. It's going to the installation that they've already got the sculpture. It just needs to be installed. It needs a base platform to build that. The plan is to remove 5 trees from Cradle of Country Music Park. They've heard a lot more opposition to removing those trees from Cradle of Country Music Park than they've heard about the stadium.
Right. Yeah.
And
that probably affects their discussion and their votes.
it probably will. That matter did get postponed, so they will be considering it again. There was and the proposal was to pause the project for 6 months and try to figure out a way to do this project and not remove these trees at the same time. So.
Right, and we'll come back and talk about that in a couple of weeks when they do address it. Okay, moving on from strictly local issues to a much broader issue. One thing that also happened this past week was on Thursday, the state's trigger law on abortion kicked in. So right after the Supreme Court ruling came down in June, it almost immediately became illegal in Tennessee to perform an abortion after about 6 weeks of gestation. The trigger law that was set to take effect then a little bit later kicked in, and now in Tennessee, if you get pregnant tonight, abortion is illegal from the moment of fertilization with almost no exceptions. There is, in the law, it says there is an affirmative defense if a doctor feels that the mother, the woman carrying the pregnancy, is in danger of death or irreparable bodily injury to internal organs and so forth, that the doctor... The law does not say it's okay to perform an abortion under those circumstances. I think you've got some Republican legislators who supported the law and are maybe a little uncomfortable with the fact that it's actually going to take effect now. Because when they voted for it, the Roe versus Wade decision was still the guiding precedent in the country. They were able to approve this law in 2019 without it actually taking effect. Now they're actually having to live with the consequences of it. And you've seen a lot of Republicans say, well, we put in an exception. That's actually not technically true. The law does not have an exception for life of the mother. What it says is, if a doctor believes this, and then they perform an abortion, they have an affirmative defense of saying, and having to prove that the mother's life was in danger, or was in danger of grievous bodily harm and so forth. But what affirmative defense means is you're already in a criminal justice situation at that point. What this means is that any time that the state or local officials believe that an abortion has taken place, there's going to be an investigation. The doctor is going to be questioned, will be subject to potential prosecution, and they will be able to mount a legal defense that they did this to save the life of the mother. And whether the prosecutor or if it goes to court, a jury agrees with that, that could be okay. But
they're still going to be charged, and it's still going to be on the record.
They're certainly going to be investigated. I mean, there will be an investigation. I was talking to somebody about this. It's really similar to when we think about what we call justifiable homicide, self-defense. There is no law in Tennessee that says, here are the 6 conditions under which you can shoot your neighbor, right? There's no law that gives you just the right to, under X, Y, Z circumstances, go and shoot your neighbor. There are, however, if you end up in a situation where you shoot your neighbor, there are some affirmative defenses you can mount, that you're defending yourself, that, whatever. But all of that there's always an investigation. There's never a case where you shoot your neighbor and the cops don't bother to come out and question you and maybe arrest you, fingerprint you, all these kinds of things, and that the DA doesn't at least look at it for potential prosecution. That's what essentially every suspected abortion in Tennessee now is going to be treated like a potential crime scene that has to be investigated. So that's the situation we are now in Tennessee, and we ran a story this past week with interviews with 3 women who live in Knoxville, Knox County, who had all had abortions, just kind of talking about their own experiences, the circumstances they were in and the decisions that they made, and then kind of talking about what it would be like for them under the current regime that we are now under. And, I think it's going to be incumbent on all of us in the media to keep covering these stories, because this is a major shift in American law, well, in Tennessee law, it's a state-by-state thing now. And none of us really know what impact any of this is going to have. We can sort of guess, well, maybe this will happen, maybe that will happen. But I think it's going to be important for us to pay attention to it and to really try to understand the on-the-ground impact that it's having on people's lives. One thing I would say to any readers of Compass, any listeners to this podcast, if you have an experience, if you know somebody who has an experience and they're willing to talk about it, in one form or another, we would very much like to hear from people, because there's always been a fair amount of stigma around talking about abortion, because there's been so much conflict about it, and it's something a lot of people just feel it's very personal. It's a very personal decision. A lot of people aren't comfortable talking about it. But
and one of the things is that you talk about how it's going to change things. Of course, from now on, if a woman does choose to have an abortion, and she's from Tennessee, she's going to have to go out of state.
Yeah.
And the closest state to East Tennessee that where abortion is pretty much going to be guaranteed to continue to be legal is Virginia. And one interesting thing that happened recently is that there is a women's clinic in Bristol, Tennessee. Bristol famously is a divided city. The main drag is, one side of it's Tennessee, one side of it's Virginia. There's a clinic that provides abortion services in Tennessee, the Tennessee side of Bristol. They have opened up a new clinic on the Virginia side of the border in Bristol, so that they can continue to provide services to women in Tennessee. They will be the closest clinic in East Tennessee to women from Knoxville, Knox County, and the surrounding areas. So that will be interesting to see how that dynamic works out. The women in West Tennessee, for example, the closest place is Illinois.
Yeah.
And there's also a clinic that provides abortion services in Illinois. It's opening up a new one in the southern part of the state because women from Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, Arkansas that will be their closest one.
Point. Yep. Yeah. So as all of this moves forward, we do very much want to continue to try to track its impact on our community, and just certainly if anybody has any stories that they think we should know about, please contact us. Okay, moving from sort of that big picture topic, let's quickly touch on this sort of odd esoteric change, another going back into the land use.
I tell you one thing, we can't have a Compass Points broadcast or podcast without delving into an arcane topic. And this one is arcane. I'll try not to, even though this is actually a story almost literally about the weeds on the side of the road.
Right.
I'll try to stay out of the weeds as much as possible. There's a new state law that governs kind of how rights of way are acquired in certain circumstances for things like roads, road widening projects, road improvement projects, things like that. And I think the best way to actually talk about it is to give it, maybe an example of what had been going on. And what had been going on, developers and attorneys who represent them and property owners, they attest has been unconstitutional. And what has happened was the past practice. If you had say you have a farm in rural Knox County on a narrow road, which almost all farms in Knox County are on narrow roads that are not, they don't have enough right of way to meet standards. So if a new road couldn't go on there, they'd have to, without getting more right of way. But if you wanted to subdivide your property, and it didn't matter whether it was for 400 unit subdivision, or you wanted to subdivide it for your family to have, each of your kids to have a house on the family farm, you have to submit a plan to the planning commission, and it would not be approved if you did not donate right of way to the county, or it also applies in the city, if you did not donate that right of way.
So like a strip of land, say, alongside that narrow road that could be used to expand to a turn lane or something to accommodate the traffic that may be generated.
Right, and so one of the things is the argument was that violated the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, which requires government to compensate you if they're going to take your property, if they want to use your property. So
government can acquire property it has legal right to, but under the Fifth Amendment, it has to pay for it.
You're right. Yeah, that's it. I mean, that goes back to eminent domain. I mean, eminent domain, you're not voluntarily giving it up, but they still have to pay you for it.
Right.
But anyway, in this instance, if like you said, if there was say you had a quarter mile of this property you wanted to subdivide that fronts this narrow road, then you would have been forced to donate the right-of-way on your side of that road in case they ever wanted to widen it.
Right. So you're giving up like 10, 12 feet or whatever, of developable land.
And it depends on the width of the road and the type of road it is, because different road types have different requirements now for their widths. But the point that the law was trying to address is you had no choice. You had to do it, or you wouldn't get your plans approved. And this is one of those things that had become so routine that, and I cover the Planning Commission. It had become so routine that nobody even talked about it, and I did not even realize it was an issue until I was alerted to this change in state law, and
which was based on court decisions, right?
Yeah. Well, what the state law? There was no state law. These planning commissions all over the state can do this. It isn't just a Knox County thing. But what it does is it puts the process in line with some U.S. Supreme Court decisions on when this is okay. This practice of requiring a donation, a property essentially. It's called dedication. I don't know why it's not called donation. It's called dedication, though. And the Supreme Court has laid out when the situations that dedication is acceptable. Basically, try to put this in layman's terms, because when you talk to an attorney about it, you don't get layman's terms. But basically, it's got to fulfill a real public need that the government has to demonstrate, and it has to basically be fair. The property owner needs to get something in return that, a reasonably comparable benefit that the public body gets. So it's a two-part test that now developers are going to, or the governments are going to have to meet in order for this to be okay. And what is going to happen now is every time a subdivision plan comes up for approval, the government's going to have to prove that, or demonstrate that this property owner needs to donate the property. And one of the things, and I can give you an example too of where this might come into play. Let's take that farm we're talking about out in the county on this narrow road. If there's no project, if it's first of all, large subdivisions have to have traffic plans. And traffic plans generally come up with recommendations for road improvements. And if mentioned a turn lane, if there's a left turn lane into this new subdivision, that's obviously a public benefit. It's obviously a benefit to the property owner because people will have safer access, and you can justify that. And so in those situations, probably the government would be able to take that right of way without compensating the landowner. However, if it's a smaller development, or smaller, like I said earlier, dividing it up for your family, there's no need to expand the narrow road. Well, they can't just make you give that right of way to them. If the government wants that right of way, they're going to have to pay for it.
Right. So theoretically, this probably will end up costing local government more in terms of doing some of these road improvements, but it's very hard to estimate how much or what that actual impact is going to be.
It is almost impossible to estimate. First of all, they don't know yet, which subdivisions would qualify for this and which wouldn't, because the U.S. Supreme Court even said, hey, you got to do this on a case-by-case basis, and they will have to. The county is looking at coming up with some situations in which they are going to say that dedication applies. Right. One of them is the one we just mentioned, where there were road improvements made. Another one that they talked about is if we've already got a road improvement project in our capital improvements plan, and somebody on that road wants to get their property subdivided, then we can do it there too. Don't know if that passes muster. We don't know what really passes muster.
Well, and it seems to me another thing that's likely to happen here is that, because developers, of course, can always choose to make that donation if they want to. And so if you run into some of these more controversial subdivisions that we see where there's a lot of local opposition, and it maybe there's an appeal to county commission or so forth, this becomes another sort of carrot that instead of being required to just do it as a matter of course, developers will be able to come forth on these more controversial ones and say, look, we're willing
yes,
to
we're
do
doing this out of the goodness of our heart.
And it just becomes one more thing they can offer to kind of try to make it more likely that their project gets approved.
Yeah, and it's going to make what it's going to do is it's going to make right-of-way acquisition a little bit trickier for road widening projects, and most of these wouldn't affect road building projects because there aren't very many roads that get built anymore new. So. And it's not going to affect things like state roads because the Tennessee Department of Transportation comes in and buys up the land. They don't fool with that. But it could increase the cost of some projects, and even within if you say, okay, well, I can look at this road and I know it's going to cost some money on it, but you don't know how much because you don't know. One road might have 10 properties that have already been subdivided and already have surrendered their right of way, and another road, same length, might just have one. So there's a lot of it's almost impossible to guess how much it will end up costing, but it will cost more on some projects.
Right. All right. Well, rights of way, uses on review. Once again, Compass Points is the place to come for in-depth discussion of esoteric land use regulation. Speaking of land use regulation, let's now go to our interview with Andrew Davis, the policy advisor to Mayor Jacobs, and dig in a little bit to this whole controversy over the change that was made to the Board of Zoning Appeals jurisdiction. Okay, joining us for our interview this week, we have Andrew Davis, who is policy advisor to Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs. Andrew works closely with the mayor on a number of policy initiatives and has been very involved in the vote that happened this past week, having to do with some changes in appeals process, which we'll talk about in a minute. But first of all, Andrew, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it. I've been looking forward to it.
Great. Well, I thought that since you're kind of one of these behind the scenes type figures in local government that people may not be that familiar with, could you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us about yourself. Where are you from, and what did you do to get to where you are?
Sure. Depending on what part of the county I'm in, I usually don't like to lead with the fact that I'm from Farragut, but I am a Farragut lifer. I'm still in Farragut. It's home. It's changed quite a bit, but it's still home. Went to Farragut High School, University of Tennessee. Got involved with politics first with Jason Zachary's campaign against Congressman Duncan. Actually, we were not successful. I was 17 or 18 and knew Jason from church, but I just kind of got the bug, and I've been doing campaigns ever since. Congressman Burchett took a chance on me out of college and hired me to kind of help run his campaign. And big chance. I didn't have nearly the adequate experience for that. But the good news is he'd been doing this for about 30 years, so he did. And I got the privilege of, I always looked at it as getting my MBA in politics, and getting paid to get my MBA in politics. Not paid much, but paid. And from there, I went and worked for Governor Lee for one legislative session, came back and worked for Burchett again in 20, and I've been with the mayor kind of doing policy and legislation since January of 2021, and I've really enjoyed it.
Well, and that is good political education. First of all, starting off with a loss, I think, is a good way to get into politics, because you realize what that feels like, and you don't always win. And then, of course, working for Congressman Burchett, who I believe, speaking of somebody who has never experienced a loss, I think he's won every single primary and election he has ever run in. So
he has.
I'm sure that was a good training ground.
Absolutely. He did lose party chair when he was like 20 years old, and he says it's the greatest thing that ever happened to him. It saved his career. So that's the only thing. Yeah.
Well, it is good to get that experience early on, kind of. Well, so speaking of wins, to put things in sort of basic terms, you and the mayor had a bit of a win this past week. County Commission did approve this change to the appeals process for certain decisions coming out of the Planning Commission that people have in the past been able to appeal these development plans to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And now under this new ordinance that was passed, they can file an appeal to the Board of Zoning Appeals, but the developer who's working on the project could opt to just have that go straight to Chancery Court, which, they could always do that anyway after the Board of Zoning Appeals. So this was a bit, this went on for several months, lots of discussion, became pretty heated. A lot of neighborhood and community groups came out in opposition to it. County commissioners were feeling a lot of pressure, I know, from them. And you were kind of right in there sending regular updates and information to county commissioners, kind of lobbying for this. So can you just kind of walk us through this, I guess, starting with how did this become an issue that you and the mayor's office felt like was something you needed to address?
So I'll say this first and foremost. We never in a million years imagined that this would become the most controversial topic that we take up during my, I guess I've been here about 2 years. This was in many regards more difficult than the baseball stadium. For me personally, it didn't have the baseball stadium had a collective of government affairs folks behind it, which helped smooth it over. But for where I'm concerned, this is the toughest battle we've fought since I've been here. This began with Hanson Sale, who's Knoxville Area Association of Realtors kind of government relations representative. He gave a presentation a couple months ago on what he calls green tape, which is basically government, layers of government that slow down development, drive up costs. The mayor went to Jim Snowden, our engineering director, and said, I need you to find some ways to get efficiencies. And Jim and I think we were at lunch several months ago, and he just said, hey, I think it was after a BZA day where they hadn't had a quorum or something. And he just said, BZA is a problem. We need to do something about these development plans. It's starting to become something that happens more regularly. I think we've had 3 appeals this year. They keep saying that it's not accelerating, but it is accelerating. It's still not, anywhere near the most important challenge facing us or this massive crisis. But we thought for once government might be a little proactive about something and try to address it before it became that. So yeah, it really came from Hanson's speech and the mayor urging Jim to look for some efficiencies. And we thought it was fairly innocuous. Didn't imagine
technical, really. It's
right.
It's a small and technical enough change that both Scott and I have wrestled with how to even explain it to kind of lay people.
Yeah. My friends ask, or my family, they've seen everything that's going on. They're like, what even is this? And I'm like, you don't even want me to tell you. It's so boring and so niche that you don't even really want me to explain to you what this is.
Well, and we should say, so that report that Hanson Sale gave was particularly focused on the housing stock in Knox County, the fact that our housing starts are still not back up to what they were before the 2008 recession. And that, according to the Association of Realtors, one of the major factors driving housing prices in Knox County and the spikes that we've seen is just a lack of supply, right?
Right. Absolutely. It is, I'd say, the major factor, pulling these out of thin air, but I think it's something like 66% of the housing is being fought over by 25% of the people. Those are round numbers, but that under $300,000 window of housing, which for people like me, I'm not a homeowner yet. I'm 27. That's where you buy in the first time. They're gone before you can find them. And unless we, the mayor is really, really dedicated to doing something about that and making this a place where people who grow up here can stay and find jobs. And we've heard from the chamber and business folks who've just said, it's an economic development issue. It really is. Part of why we didn't get Smith and Wesson here was a lack of housing in the area they were looking at. So it's one of the kind of main issues that we're going to be focused on going forward is housing supply.
And this change isn't going to magically create more housing, but I guess the thinking is that it's one thing that could sort of clear the way for some developments, basically. It's
step one, and it was really more than anything heading off something that we saw as a budding problem of just, hey, this is being this body should not be hearing these incredibly technical plans. It should be something that goes before a judge, and it seems that it's happening with increasing frequency. So let's just kind of head it off at the pass and make government work more efficiently. And there will be several, I don't know what they are right now, but we're still examining our processes and saying, what are some other things we can do to streamline? This was really just a first step in trying to make this smoother.
One thing that's interesting, you mentioned the baseball stadium, the differences between that and this, and I wanted to get to kind of the political maneuverings that go on with the baseball stadium. County Commission was pretty much all on board from the beginning. It's easy. Most issues that come up, all you have to do is count the votes, and you pretty much know how people are going to go. You might give them a heads up that you're going to be presenting something, and we count on you for support. What's it like when you have people on commission? This vote for the BZA change was more divided than most, and there were people who are on commission who are allies for the most part on every other issue with the mayor's office. Kind of what's it like trying to, I don't know if you wine and dine them or twist their arm or what you do. That's kind of what the question is. How do you approach these commissioners who are either on the fence or kind of on the other side?
I look at my job as a sales job. Instead of selling, my dad's a window and door salesman. I don't sell windows and doors. I sell politicians' ideas. And for me, the county commissioners are kind of like clients. And yes, Terry Hill and Daisha and Courtney weren't with us this time, and John, and 9 times out of 10 they are. But we realize we're going to need them again next month. So we don't ever, we're not going to go scorched earth on them because they were against us on this. And we knew they were against us. And that's really what when I talk with them, I just say, look, vote your conscience, vote your district, but please tell me what you're going to do. Just be honest with us. And as long as they're honest with us, we can pretty much live with whatever they do. We didn't really muscle anybody or lean on them too hard on this one. We just kind of try to, reach out, sit them down and just say, hey, this is why this is important. I know you're hearing this. And I'll say this, kudos to Kevin Murphy and the Knox County Planning Alliance. They are very formidable and worthy adversaries on these issues. They come with statistics and homework and graphs. And they were they presented a lot of challenges. They work very hard. But it's really kind of just a battle of wits. And
and one thing I have to say, I kind of enjoy, because I guess I'm the kind of person who enjoys policy debates. But this one actually felt like a real policy debate. We don't always get those in politics, either local or national. But I would get an email one day from the Knox County Planning Alliance, kind of outlining all these things, and then get an email the next day from you, kind of responding to that point by point. I felt like it was an argument really on the merits of the issue.
Yeah, it was, and that's fun. I mean, this was hard, but when you really believe in a cause and feel like you're doing something worthwhile, and you have somebody who's smart kind of arguing against you, how can you not have fun with it a little bit? So I really enjoyed that, and I'm obviously enjoyed it more that we were successful. But Kevin's a smart guy, and it was a tough argument, but I think the truth is on our side, and that's probably why we prevailed.
So in some ways, it struck me that this could be a little bit of a preview for some of the discussions we're likely to see next year as the Advanced Knox planning process, which we've talked about on the podcast before, comes to the actual decision stage where maps are going to be presented and so forth. Knowing that, for example, you have a very engaged group with the Knox County Planning Alliance and all of the affiliated homeowners associations and so forth, who are paying a lot of attention to that. Obviously, they can get people out to meetings and they can generate emails and phone calls. What's going to be the approach for you all to those issues when it comes to, because right now everybody's in favor of Advanced Knox because everybody broadly seems to agree that, well, the county needs to update its planning, but these things always become complicated toward the end when specific decisions have to be made. So I guess, what did you learn from this that you think will help there? Or are there ways that you all can engage with those groups more to kind of head off those last minute fights and so forth?
I think yes and no. I think that there's common ground to be found with the planning folks. It's easy for us to castigate them as communists who want to build a wall around Knox County, and they call us, greedy, soulless disciples of developers or whatever, I'm sure. And neither is true. The truth is somewhere in between. There are certainly some things that we both want, but there are also certainly just some clear lines of demarcation between what we believe and what they believe. And there is no amount of I'm not going to change Kevin's mind. He's not going to change my mind. What's going to happen is we are going to work to change other people's minds. And that's what's going to be the deciding factor on Advanced Knox. And for us, that means, as you know, typically the kinds of people that are engaged in planning and things like that you're either directly affected or you're a political nerd like me. And that doesn't represent a broad swath of our population.
Broad swath of the population goes to sleep as soon as you say the word zoning,
Yes. So the trick for us, I think.
Zone out.
What'd you say, Scott?
They literally zone out.
Yes. The trick for us is pulling regular Joes in who would rather be at soccer practice or Wednesday night church or anywhere but the city county building, which is where I would be if I didn't work here. Getting those people involved, I think, is crucial. How do you do that? Check back with me in a couple months, but that's key.
Well, and it does seem like both this and the Advanced Knox process, and that housing report, all of these are connected to these questions about will Knox County grow? How will Knox County grow? Where will Knox County grow? And I guess, taking the 50,000 foot view from the mayor's office, what do you see as the priorities in trying to figure out how to accommodate that kind of growth, but not overwhelm the people and the infrastructure that's already here, or degrade the quality of life that people are accustomed to?
So one of those areas of common ground that I think we probably have with the planning alliance folks is Hardin Valley is a mess. That can't ever be allowed to happen again. We would argue that, and this is maybe a philosophical difference that we have with them, that the only way to avoid that sprawl is greater density. And folks in these rural areas, understandably, they don't, they hear 5 units an acre, they think, oh, you're going to destroy our town. But when you can pack more people on less land, that preserves your farmland, apartments, things like that, which nobody, people don't want. Like I said, I'm from Farragut. We have those apartments going in over at the old Kroger. And I heard from so many people I grew up with screaming that it was going to be Section 8 housing or something, and folks don't like that. And I understand why they don't like it. But I think that that's the only way, to create the volume that we need to have enough supply in our housing market to drive costs down, and also to stop this sprawl. Another thing is more town center and mixed use space. If Hardin Valley, if in the middle of these mega developments they'd put up, if they'd been putting a Walgreens, Kroger hybrid grocery store like you have off North Shore, you wouldn't have to get in that traffic at 5:30 every day just because you want to run to the store and get a gallon of milk. You could just run down the street. And things like that do a lot to alleviate congestion on those major arteries. We need to put an emphasis on that going forward. That's really, if you ask the mayor about this, that's the main thing that he's focused on.
Well, and it is interesting that issue of density comes up in a lot of different ways, because I was at this local flood planning meeting the other week that there were county representatives there, city representatives, people from Anderson County. And one of the issues that they identified was specifically, and these were stormwater engineers saying that density is really important in flood planning, because basically, what causes flooding is not the number of people living on any given acre, but just how much impervious, property there is. And so if you have 100 units in the same space that you could maybe have 5 houses, the runoff impact is almost the same, but you accommodate a lot more people with the 100 units. So
yeah,
density it's interesting that, well, and Scott knows too, that, in the city, they're trying to pack density down onto Cumberland Avenue, and not everybody loves that either, it's just kind of one of these challenges that I guess really it is that people kind of like things the way they are or the way they used to be, right?
Yeah, I'm one of those people. I hate change. I love Knoxville. I wish I could keep it exactly how it is today forever, but you can't. You just can't. It's foolish to think that you can. And your best course is to accept that it's changing and find a way to make the best changes possible to try to protect your way of life.
All right. Scott, you got anything else?
Yeah, it was just thinking one of the things is when you talk to people, density is, everybody talks about how we need more density. It's definitely do. But nobody wants it anywhere close to them.
Yeah.
You can talk to somebody in the Gibbs community, and they'll say that, we need more density in Knox County, just not here. And,
Yes.
I'm not picking on them. It's that way in South Knox County. It's that way in West Knox County. It's that way it's that way on Cumberland Avenue, where it's already Fort Sanders is already the most densely populated neighborhood in the county, and they're adding more density, and as Jesse mentioned, a lot of people don't like that. So
yeah,
that's another kind of gets to what I'd asked a little bit earlier. You're dealing with a lot of people who may not see eye to eye to you, and it's one thing to deal with commissioners who are also in the political game, but you're dealing with voters, and you're dealing with residents, and so is there a different approach when you engage them than you take when you engage fellow practitioners of the political arts?
Yeah, I would say so. Honestly, the smart thing to do when a constituent is talking to you is just shut up and listen. And I might already know that they're not going to change my mind, but I'm not going to be disrespectful and try to, argue with them too much. But you stand firm and just say, hey, this is what the mayor believes. This is why he believes it. If you disagree, I'm sorry, and I hope that we can win your support on some other issues. And there's really not a whole lot more you can do than that.
All right. Well, I think all of that will probably give us plenty to keep watching and writing about for the next couple of years at least. Who knows? Probably the next decade here in Knox County.
I think so too.
All right. Well, Andrew, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate y'all.
And thanks again to Andrew for talking with us. All right, we are now to the Q&A portion of our podcast. Every week we invite subscribers on our subscriber-only Facebook group, the Compass Colloquy, to tell us anything they would like to hear discussed on the podcast this week. And one suggestion that we got this week was to talk a little bit about the Knox County Republican Party's Lincoln Day dinner. And the plans for this were just announced a couple of days ago. This news was broken, we should say, by Brian Hornback, local Republican blogger who also is a party official, and so he has a little bit an inside track on Republican news. But he reported, and it has been confirmed, that the special guest speaker, so the Lincoln Day dinner, little bit of context
Give some
here.
background. Yeah.
Both the county Democratic and Republican parties have annual fundraising dinners. The Republican one is the Lincoln Day dinner. And typically they have some featured guest speaker, and this is a ticketed event where local party members come out, and it's a fundraiser. Mm-hmm. Usually it's a fundraiser for the parties. And so last year, the local Republican Party had a controversial speaker at their Lincoln Day dinner. It was Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, which is a basically far right. And I know that sort of term far right, like what do we mean when we say far right? Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA is a very, very conservative, very anti-liberal, anti-progressive organization. And the county Republican Party actually paid Charlie Kirk, I think, $20,000 to come and speak here last year. That was a little controversial among some party members because usually the party doesn't pay their speaker. The idea is you bring in a speaker who's going to sell tickets to raise money for the party. So this year, my understanding is they're not paying their speaker, although they are going to pay for travel and lodging, the things you usually do for a speaker. So the guest speaker this year is Representative Lauren Boebert, a famous and or notorious, depending on how you look at it, first-term congresswoman from Colorado, who is mostly well known for being very vocal in favor of gun rights. First of all, that was kind of what she made her name on. She and her husband owned, I don't know if it's still open, but a gun-themed sports bar in Colorado.
In Rifle,
Colorado. Wonderfully named Rifle, Colorado, where staff members were encouraged to go armed and customers as well and so forth. During her time in office, she's become known for, she's a fierce vocal supporter of former President Donald Trump, apologist, I guess you could say, for January 6th protesters, insurrectionists, whatever you want to call them. And basically, if you just kind of go down she has embraced at least portions of the QAnon conspiracy theory. She is known, people generally put her in sort of like a subcategory of kind of extreme right members of Congress, also including Marjorie Taylor Greene, including Representative Matt Gaetz out of Florida, Madison Cawthorn from North Carolina, sort of that group, which is not a group overall that's really beloved of the National Republican Party leadership. I think there's a lot of discomfort with them. Yeah,
they're glad that it's a Republican in the seat.
Right.
They're probably not too thrilled about the Republican who is in that seat. If that makes sense.
And the amount of sort of oxygen that they take up, the high visibility that they have, even though all of certainly she and Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, are just in their first term. They're very junior members of Congress, but they are very visible and very vocal. And so, yes, the Knox County Republican Party, with the assistance of our own representative, Congressman Tim Burchett, they are bringing Lauren Boebert here as their guest speaker. So what does that say, Scott?
Well, it says that, I think the one thing it says is that the local Republican Party leadership is getting further to the right, as you would, away from the more establishment, traditional pro-business stuffed shirts, actually the stuffy Republicans of old. So I think it's moving, and they're trying to appeal to younger Republicans, and I think they're trying to stir up the base. They're trying to get people energized and excited going into the midterm. So I think that's one thing it tells me. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this is the Democrats have responded in absolute glee. They seen posts on social media and all that. They think that the further to the right the Republican Party leadership goes, the more the bigger opportunity they have to get people in the center to vote Democratic. Now, Knox County is I don't know how successful that will be, but it seems to be something they're welcoming. So that the more the Republican Party moves to the right, the better for us is the kind of message you get from the Democrats.
And it is an interesting contrast because the Democrats, when they had their own fundraising dinner earlier in the year, their guest speaker was former Senator Doug Jones from Alabama, who, in addition to being a former senator, really made his name as a prosecutor in Alabama who brought to justice some of the people involved in the notorious Birmingham church bombing down there, and is kind of viewed as a pillar of sort of the Southern Democratic Party, and kind of a contrast between him and a first-term sort of fringe conspiracy theorist from Colorado.
Yeah, it's a big contrast. The other contrast that Matt Shears, the head of the Democratic Party in Knox County, will point out is that that Doug Jones didn't charge him anything to speak.
Right.
And
Lauren, as I said, Lauren Boebert apparently is also not. They're not paying her. They're just going to pay her expenses. It's not another Charlie. I guess maybe
that was because that was in basically the same time frame that Charlie Kirk was here, and they made a big deal of the fact that. And again, they're wanting to go after some of these disaffected Republicans, making a big deal of, they paid Charlie Kirk money from the party's coffers. That's, if you went to the dinner, essentially you're paying for the speaker. You're not supporting the party, you're paying for the speaker. And I don't know if that played into the decision to bring in Boebert, who won't be taking a fee or not, but it certainly takes away a line of attack that the Democrats have used before.
Sure. But I think it says a lot both about the current orientation of the county party leadership, the Republican Party leadership, and also about what they see as the future of the Knox County Republican Party, which is really clearly pitched and appealing to really the far right of the party. Is that the future of the Republican Party in Knox County, which is a metropolitan county with a fairly diverse population? I don't know.
Yeah,
I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, we'll find out. It's one of those things that happens over time. I think that part of that reflects the general overall polarization in the nation, but I think that they think that that also appeals to a younger demographic, and I think Republicans in general are concerned that younger voters and are drifting more toward the Democratic Party.
Oh, the data on millennials and members of Generation Z are not good for the Republican Party nationwide, and I think that's true in most parts of the country. Probably Republicans would say, well, yeah, but everybody's more liberal when they're younger, and so it's okay. But yes, I think that is a big concern for the Republican Party. You're right.
Yeah, and so I think that they are trying to accelerate that switch from young people when they or Democrats when they're young and Republicans when they're older. I don't think that actually holds true, but for most people, but we'll see how that works out. I think that the Republican Party is. I think they're beyond a crossroads. I think that this is really that they are. What the question will be: what will the more moderate Republicans or people who identify themselves as Republicans? And we're not talking about political leaders. I'm just talking about the guy that that works at the insurance office, who tends to vote Republican, but is not really an ideologue, and what's going to happen with those voters.
Right. People who may not know who Lauren Boebert is, because Lauren
Probably
Boebert is
don't.
very well known to people who spend a lot of time consuming, say, right-wing media, Fox News, and talk radio and so forth. She's not well known necessarily among just kind of your average quasi-engaged voter. So we will see, but that is what's going on there. And if you want to go and see Lauren Boebert speak yourself and support the County Republican Party, you can find information about that fundraising dinner on their website. Okay, so looking ahead to this coming week, and as we said, just a reminder, we are not going to have an episode of the podcast next week. One reason we're not going to have an episode of the podcast next week, we don't anticipate, of course, you never know, news can happen at any time, but based on what's on the calendar, we don't anticipate a whole lot happening next week. It is the lead up to a big holiday weekend, and things always slow down during those weeks. But we do have just a few things happening. One significant thing on Thursday, September 1st, is going to be the swearing in for all of the Knox County officials who were elected in the August 4th election. So County Mayor Glenn Jacobs will be sworn into a second term, County Sheriff Tom Spangler, several members of the school board and county commission, they will all be sworn in. And then shortly after that, on Thursday, County Commission will hold its annual organizational meeting where they will elect their officers, a chair and vice chair, and make committee assignments and so forth. One thing to note about that, it seems likely that current County Commission Chair Richie Beeler is going to get a second year as Commission Chair. Beeler went to work for the county earlier this year. He had worked for the county for years before he joined County Commission, but he had left the county and was working as a minister. And in March, he came back to work for the county as Chief of Staff to County Clerk Sherry Witt. At the time that he kind of came back into the fold, which is legal, we should know, we've talked about this before, you can be an employee of Knox County and serve on County Commission at the same time. You cannot be an employee of the city and serve on City Council. You can't be an employee of the school system and serve on the school board, but in the county you can do this. But he told his colleagues at the time that he wasn't going to seek a second term as chairman. However, at this last Monday's meeting, Commissioner John Schoonmaker really made an appeal to Beeler, saying that he thinks he's done a good job kind of being an even-handed, no drama, professional chairman. The main job of the chairman really is to run the meetings and kind of keep things moving and keep everything organized. And so Schoonmaker said to Beeler, I hope you will reconsider and think about a second term. I talked to Commissioner Beeler about this, and he basically said, well, I said I wouldn't seek another term. but if it seeks me, I won't refuse it. And in other words, if called to serve. And so
terms are always out there looking for victims.
Right.
So, yeah.
If another term as chairman, sneaks up behind me and grabs it, it seems likely that is what's going to happen. I think Boebert is generally pretty well respected by his colleagues. And if he is reelected as chair, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure for the new vice chair to be a woman, because our new county commission, once everybody is sworn in this coming Thursday, is going to be 6 women and 5 men. So it's the first time we've ever had a majority of women on county commission. And so it wouldn't be a great look, I would say, if you have a female majority on county commission and you go ahead and have men still in all the leadership positions. And the most likely candidate for that vice chair position is Commissioner Terry Hill, because right now there are only 3 women on county, until the new commissioners join, there are only 3 women on county commission. And Commissioner Hill is the only Republican of those 3. The other 2, Daisha Lundy and Courtney Durrett, are both Democrats. Does not seem super likely that the 9 Republicans on county commission are going to vote for one of the 2 Democrats as a vice chair. And also, Terry Hill has experience in these roles. She is a former chair of the Knox County School Board, so she knows how to run a meeting. She understands parliamentary procedure and so forth. And I asked her about this, and she said she would be honored if elected, essentially. And so I think the most likely thing that we're going to see, of course, anything can happen in a public meeting, but the most likely thing is that we will see Richie Boebert for a second term as chair, and then Terry Hill in that vice chair role. Anything else we need to think about this upcoming week?
Well, again, we're going into holiday mode, and we're also going into the beginning of football season. And one of the things we found out last week was that the workforce shortage that has caused Knoxville area transit to cut back on bus service throughout the city of Knoxville is going to have an impact on the ball game, at least getting to and from the ball game. CAT has always, but I mean for years and years and years, and as long as anybody can remember, has provided shuttle service primarily from the Civic Auditorium and Coliseum to Neyland Stadium. Fans can go there, just hop on a shuttle bus and go to the stadium. There are going to be fewer of those shuttle buses.
And this is something the city in past years really invested a lot of effort in kind of promoting as an option. Hey, you can park at our garage and ride our trolley.
Yeah, park here, ride over to the stadium. You don't have to fight with the campus traffic and all that. And a lot of people did take advantage of it, or have taken advantage of it, and will be in the future. But there are going to be fewer buses available. They're saying that if you're planning to attend the game and you park remotely, consider using like the regular routes and not just the game day shuttles. So that's another kind of indication that the workforce issues that are hitting everybody, but they're impacting public services, and also this gives us an opportunity to point out that the first home ball game for the University of Tennessee is Thursday night, not next Saturday. It's Thursday night. So on Thursday, the throngs that are going to go to the swearing in of the county commission, and but no, I mean the stadium traffic will be big because it's a weekday. Everybody's going to be working on Thursday anyway. There'll be a lot of traffic, and so actually, riding a bus probably sounds like an attractive option when it's like that. The problem is there are going to be fewer of them. So, but anyway, that's coming up, and then of course we've got the holiday.
Yep. So. Yeah, and so that day, Thursday, if you work in or around downtown, it might be a good day to work remotely if you're in a position where that's an option.
Work remotely if it's not an option. Maybe a little pay time off.
Right.
Whatever you can do to get out, or at least leave early. If you have to go into the office, leave it at noon or 1 o'clock so you don't get stuck. Because I would imagine that the traffic around 5 to 6 is going to be pretty heavy.
Sure. All right. Well, we hope everybody has a great next week, and wonderful Labor Day weekend, and we will be back the week after that to talk about everything that happens between now and then.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.